Welcome to Squirrels of Doom, Drinking with Geeks. I'm Matt.
I'm Roz.
And this week, in honor of Liam Neeson's birthday being June 7th, we're going to look at the Rob Roy. This is a particularly exciting cocktail for us to do. For me, I've never actually drank a Rob Roy.
I have never ordered one.
Yeah, so we don't know what to expect, and we're really looking forward to it.
Essentially, the Rob Roy is a Manhattan, but using scotch instead of bourbon or rye.
The origins of this cocktail are really shrouded in mystery. When you're looking online, you'll see a ton of different stories about how it came to light. The one we like the most, so the one we're going to tell you, is that it was invented in 1894 in a bar in New York. There was an opening of a new operetta about the historical figure Rob Roy, and a bar nearby wanted to capitalize on this, so they whipped something together, called it the Rob Roy, and history was made. But you may be wondering who was the actual Rob Roy that all these tales and legends have sprung up around. Certainly the only thing we really knew Rob Roy from was the 1995 movie, starring our favorite Liam Neeson.
Happy birthday, Liam Neeson.
Indeed. As great as that movie was, it's not the real story of Rob Roy McGregor.
This is Robert Roy McGregor, come to reclaim the 32 beasts stolen from his lordship.
Who was a Scottish outlaw that lived from about 1671 to 1734 in the southern highlands of Scotland. I don't know the geography of Scotland that well. I've never been there. But
we should go.
I compared where he was from to a whiskey region map. And that is how I confirmed that it was in the southern highlands. Which is also part of how we chose our scotches. We made sure that we had at least one Highland Scotch going when we made our Rob Roy.
As you do.
Of course. Early in his life, he participated in the first Jacobite uprising in 1689. So that sounds really interesting. He was involved in in rebellions and stuff. That's not even what he's famous for. That was just when he was young. He actually went on and tried to become a cattleman, being good and respectable and living a proper life, putting that rebellion behind him. Unfortunately, his chief herder appears to have disappeared with a bunch of his money or something at some point, and ultimately he had a bunch of debt, lost everything, and because he couldn't pay his debt back, he was branded an outlaw. Once he was branded an outlaw, he kind of had no choice but to act as an outlaw, and that's when he became the legend that we know him as. He had a blood feud with the Duke of Montrose that lasted until 1722 when he was finally forced to surrender. But that was almost 10 years that he was raiding both sides of more Jacobite uprisings. So he'd clearly left his, rebel leanings behind and was just out for himself now because he'd been kind of screwed by everybody.
Han Solo. Such a tragic classic tale. I guess that's kind of the reason the story has such a Western sort of feel to it, and that was where the movie plot kind of got inspired from.
It's funny because the first time I really read much about his story, it did feel like a Western to me. But then I was kind of like, oh man, are we just shortchanging like the stories of everybody else in the world? Why we gotta always make everything about America?
Just because they had cattle and...
Yeah. Cattle and outlaws. Apparently that was a thing
everywhere,
all over the place. So there you go.
And then in 1995, they made a movie. We all know and love it. And you can sort of get a bit of the feel for the character Rob Roy and a little bit of the history. But then, as we read more about it, we discovered our favorite part of the movie, Tim Roth.
May I present Archibald Cunningham?
Archibald Cunningham, which has to be one of the best names for
classic
a
bad
British
guy name.
Evil lord kind of guy that you could come up with.
You're gonna love to hate that name, and you love to hate that guy.
Completely
Totally
fictional.
Not real at all. Made up for the movie. And Tim Roth was nominated for awards, I think even like a BAFTA for that role.
Yep.
Good job, because he stole our hearts.
Well, let's stop praising Tim Roth on Liam Neeson's birthday.
He'd approve.
Probably. And let's get to making this drink. Rob Roy is actually a really easy cocktail to make because it's only really 2 ingredients plus bitters. The most important thing to remember when you're making your Rob Roy is that this is a stirred drink, not a shaken drink. The reason that you'd choose to stir a cocktail versus shake it is because you're not using any ingredients that are cloudy, like juice or opaque. When you have all clear ingredients, you just get a nicer looking cocktail when you stir it because you don't introduce a bunch of tiny little air bubbles that make the drink kind of cloudy and can change the texture of the drink a little bit. So really, it's an aesthetic choice, but there is some solid logic behind it. And we'll go into that more in depth someday in the future when we do a drink about martinis and the travesty of James Bond. But enough of that for right now. Let's get back to our Rob Roy. First things first, we want to just put some ice in our cup. For our first ingredient, we're going to use 1 ounce of sweet vermouth. Today we're using Via Vermouth from California. It's a really nice vermouth, sweet vermouth, and they make an excellent dry vermouth as well. I like it because it's a nice step up from your classic, Martini and Rossi, which is really cheap and plentiful, but it's just not that good. And I really recommend spend a little more. Something like this is not that much more expensive, especially compared to, there are some craft vermouths out there that can be a little more pricey, but the Via is a nice reasonable price, and it's a big jump up in terms of quality. You'll just get so much more flavor, more varied flavor, more depth to your cocktails. Our second ingredient is our scotch. In this case, we're going to use some Dwarves. This is a pretty inexpensive blended whiskey, and I've never actually tried it before, although it does actually smell pretty nice. But I've seen it recommended as a really good table whiskey for when you don't want to always be busting out your expensive bottles of whiskey, and this is a nice one to have around for just inexpensive casual drink, which means great for cocktails because you don't necessarily want to spend huge money on something that you're then going to mix with a bunch of other ingredients and not be tasting all the flavors and complexities of your $150 bottle of scotch. Something like this does really well. We actually are going to do a second Rob Roy with a single malt scotch as well, just to compare that. And part of the reason I picked the Dwarves as well is because the main scotch that goes into this, the single malt that's used, is from the Aberfeldy distillery, which is a Highland scotch, so I thought was appropriate for our Highland Outlaw. And we use 2.5 ounces of our Scotch whiskey. Follow that with 2 dashes of bitters. And then you want to give it a good stir so you get some water in there. Ultimately, you're looking for almost 1.5 ounces of water that's going to be added to your cocktail to get a good dilution so that you're tasting flavors and not just the burn of alcohol. Since we're going to be serving this drink up, i.e. not over ice, we're going to want to get a little more water into it than we would if we were doing a drink that we served poured over ice. Once we've got it mixed, we grab our Hawthorne strainer and we just strain it into a nice, I don't know what style of glass you would call this. Just a cocktail glass, I suppose. Martini glass, maybe. Classic garnish for your Rob Roy is a maraschino cherry. And again, always make sure to use good maraschino cherries, not the horrible candied things. All right, now we get to actually try these drinks, which, as we've said, is really exciting because we've never tried one before. I feel like I've got a mime beside me. I'm just gonna be trapped in a box suddenly. When we did this, we've actually made 2 different ones, so we can each try one. One with our Dwarves, cheap.
You're not cheap,
It's cheap.
Oh, okay. Well,
it's $26 in Canada, in BC, so it's as cheap as you can get a bottle of whiskey. We'll see how it is. And then we also used Bowmore, which is one that I like. This is an Islay, not a Highland Scotch, but it's a nice single malt. It's relatively affordable for a Scotch. I would say it's kind of on the lower medium range, but is really good quality for its price, or at least for the price that we get it at in BC, which is high. The big reason we chose this is because it's going to be a much peatier Scotch than something like the Dwarves, and so it'll give us a nice different flavor profile that we get to try.
So today I'm going to be drinking the Dewars.
Yes. So Roz has non-peaty Highland blended Scotch, and I've got peaty Isla single malt scotch.
To Liam Neeson.
To Liam. We're on a first name basis. Oh man, I can smell the peat. This is pretty nice, but it's gonna put hair on your chest.
This is very drinkable. This is really nice.
Yeah.
Smooth. It burns in a good way. So it's got that kick to it, but
I was prepared for something less drinkable than this. This is, it's not as quaffable as a daiquiri or something really citrusy like a whiskey sour, but man, this is like. This feels like I should be in some prohibition cocktail bar.
Yeah, the bitters really bring everything together. It's binded together instead of just tasting the components. It's really nice.
Mm-hmm. Shall we switch?
Yes. Oh, and the smell of the cherries. So nice. Whoa! Goddamn!
Oh, that's better.
Ho-ho! Kaplam!
I think this really shines definitely with the milder Highland Scotch. The peatiness is a bit overpowering. This is...
Right?
You can taste way more of the flavors, The
vermouth comes through in its own way, but still blends together to make itself one unique experience.
Yeah.
This, I definitely feel like I'm tasting more of the individual ingredients. And mostly I'm tasting the scotch.
Yeah, I didn't necessarily feel that I was tasting the individual ingredients in that one, except for the peat is quite overpowering, so it pushes everything else to the back. It's there, but it is mellowed by the vermouth rather than...
And the water. It's very nice, though. Oh, the smell is beautiful.
If you're a big scotch drinker, that might be the one you prefer more. This is a little better as like an introductory Rob Roy. If you're intimidated by scotch, go with blended, something like this. If you're a big scotch fan, I think you'll enjoy the nice peaty boldness and how it blends with the sweetness of the vermouth and the kind of bitter herbal characters.
These are delicious.
So with that, cheers.